Hi, everybody. I think you all missed the countdown because I forgot to click live. Sorry about that. But welcome to the August edition of the Ubuntu Desktop Team Indaba. I'm your normal host, Heather, and then we have Philip, who's a wonderful co-host, and our special guest, Ryan, here to talk to us about this fabulous video. And if you haven't seen the Ubuntu 2204.1 point release video, we'll show it in a little bit after, we chat a little. Ryan, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi. My name's Ryan Gorley. I don't know how to describe myself anymore. I'm a designer mostly, and run a small creative agency called Free Hive. And I worked on the Ubuntu 2204 animation, and been doing work for different open source projects for a few years now. Done some of the GNOME release videos, and I am a contributor to the Inkscape project, organized their marketing team. Maybe I think it's been about 4 years ago now. But I guess the unique thing about me is that I in the agency as a whole is we do everything with just open source software. So it's a little bit unique still. Hope to make it less unique.
Yeah, that's right. Those GNOME videos are beautiful as well. How did you get started with the content creation?
Probably like most people, I liked to draw as a kid. you know, my I would say though probably I would trace my specific roots to high school art class, and and this is kind of one of the motivations for open source for me is that my art teacher, um, this was the 90s, and visual art, computer graphics was still kind of early. And so my art teacher bought a copy of Photoshop to put on his terrible computer, grading computer, and would let, I'm sure it wasn't just me, but let me, get behind his desk and learn how to use Photoshop. And so I ended up studying architecture in school, but for various reasons found myself back in this. And I think a lot of it just came down to that opportunity that I had to be exposed to that at that age. And in a roundabout way, that's kind of how I became passionate about open source, because sometimes you can look back at your life and you see these kind of moments that really have a big influence on your life, and they're small things, but I don't know. There are kids that are like me, probably more talented than me, somewhere in the world that can't afford a $55 a month license to Adobe or whatever alternative they're interested in, but open source gives them a free, accessible way for them to be exposed to these powerful tools and to learn what talents they have and what interests them. So that's one of the kind of genesis stories of for me in open source. That's where I think a lot of my passion comes from.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's especially with all the tools out there. It seems like a quick go-to to say, hey, I'm going to buy this amazing software, which is going to get me all the long worked on tools. And then, there's some open source solutions out there where some professionals might say, oh yeah, no, I can't do this special thing that Photoshop gives me. So it's really interesting to see how you've kind of built your business around this. And I guess in using open source tools is one thing, but building a whole business around it, what made you take that step?
Yeah, so I should mention, after college, I ended up working for an online retailer that had kind of a consumer goods side. I was just I was just self-taught graphic designer, and to this day, don't ask me about typography. I don't have the vocabulary to do it because I didn't come up through architectural, or I came up through architecture, not through graphic design. So I didn't get all of that formal training. I had to kind of teach myself, but I think that kind of, so I started working in graphic design, ended up helping build a creative team, and got exposed to a lot of different software. Started this company. It wasn't called FreeHive in the beginning. That kind of happened about 4 years ago. But I'm jumping around too much. But I guess how did I get into doing open source? Well, I was using the tools that everyone uses. I don't want to disparage anybody, but I will. Just kidding. Just kidding. No, the real challenge is that I've been using the Adobe Creative Suite primarily, which a lot of artists use, and I was also studying business in school at nights, and as Adobe started to kind of push people towards the subscription model, at first you could buy it wasn't, I don't think they called it Creative Cloud. It was just part of the Creative Suite, and you could get a subscription version of it, or you could still buy a perpetual license. And I look, most people don't think about licensing, right? And that's a problem for open source because we're like, well, it's a free license. They don't even know what that means. They understand licensing in so much that I can only install it on this computer, and it won't let me install it on another computer. That's kind of the extent most people think about licensing. But Adobe used to offer their software with a perpetual license, which meant that I didn't need to upgrade unless I wanted to. And the incentive structure was better because they couldn't get me to upgrade until they improved the software enough that I wanted to. And so there was this kind of, and there are other benefits to open source, but that perpetual license kind of kept me in this happy kind of state where it's like, okay, well, I feel like I have a good relationship with this vendor because they can't abuse me. I will just use CS5 forever. And if they don't, but if they come out with something better in CS6, then okay, I'll upgrade. But I could tell when they started pushing the subscription thing, because I was kind of learning about marketing and that there was more going on here than they said, where it was like, oh, this is going to be good for artists, and it's like, no, this isn't. This again, if you want to post my address in the comments so they can send me a letter, it's okay. I just
So we can head off to that aside you had, if you like.
Well, yeah. So anyhow, the point was that the subscription model really is good for them. They've had record profits from it, and it's not because it's because it kind of it puts up barriers for new competition in the market because it's so affordable for somebody to get into using Adobe software. So it prevents competition, at least from smaller players. I know there's some smaller players in there, but it also it also forces me as a user to continue to upgrade. The other kind of things that really irritated me was that this idea that I couldn't really open my own software. I mean, I've got like 15 years of design files, and unless I'm paying them every month, or I'm willing to pay a huge amount of money for like a 1-month subscription to open a file, it was very it felt manipulative. So
Mm-hmm.
so I started kind of dabbling in some of these other tools that I was becoming familiar with. A Blender was like the the first open source powerful tool that became aware with, and I used it in conjunction with Adobe. And then kind of when that all happened, and by then I was an open source fanatic before I was able to actually be an open source fanatic. I wanted to do it before I was able to do it, and I had a hard time when we had a studio in Salt Lake getting the other creative team people to get on board. But through a turn of events, I was able to do it. So I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, but that's
Yeah,
kind of
no. I did want to ask. You said that your company wasn't always called Free Hive. That changed about 4 years ago.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what was it, and where did
Uh,
Free Hive come from? Like
yeah,
the
so it
name.
was originally called G86, which was kind of an arbitrary creative agency name, and then when I first started, because I I didn't start it like if I had an MBA or wrote a business plan, I would have started. I just kind of started it. I hadn't freelanced or I didn't have any customers. I had a little bit of money in the bank, but not a lot, and I just kind of jumped in. So G86 was just kind of an arbitrary name that I wasn't sure if I was going to do more marketing consulting or design or what. I wanted to get more into design, but when you start a business, you do whatever people pay you to do. So,
Right,
you know,
right.
and then it seemed like a few years after that, we rebranded as Digit because we were trying to do this marketing focus. And then when right about the time when we did the System 76 Thalio campaign with the 3D animation and the cartoons and all that. I don't know if when they first launched the Thalio project, we worked with them on that. Right about that time, I was just committed to this kind of free software, new kind of way of doing things, and I just wanted to wear it. So I really don't want to change my name again, but every 5 years the name falls out of fashion. You won't know who I am in 5 years. I might just change it to. I don't know. I'm trying to make sure that we never have any search ranking. Is really what's going on.
Right, right.
Yeah. So that's kind of where that came from.
Okay, very
So
cool.
free hive, free software, kind of this collective mentality, and that is something unique about the agency. When we were in Salt Lake and had a physical studio, we had employees. It was just operating more like a normal agency. Whereas now it's kind of, I'm involved in almost all projects, but it's really more of a collective in a sense. Most of the other people working on projects they're not employees of Free Hive, but they're kind of independent artists and designers we bring on a per project basis. So, on any given project like the animation that we did, it only ended up being me. It had intentions early on to be a couple of us, but it ended up being me. But the Return to Thalio kind of a campaign had, I think, 7 or 8 people working at the same time on it. So we're kind of more of a collective than a traditional company.
So I guess you, like, with more people coming on, you might have also expanded to other types of content creation other than video.
Oh, say that again. Sorry.
If you expanded your circle of people in your agency, I'm guessing you also have other areas aside from video content creation.
Yeah, I mean, my interest mostly is in the creative space, creative communications, and so I think we'll probably always kind of hover around that space. But you can see some diversity in the work. I mean, I don't know how to make Unity games that play on WebGL. It's not a skill set I have, but fortunately, it's a skill set that somebody I know who's really in the Blender had. So, so we do kind of venture into other areas on a ad needed basis. Unity's not open source, just little asterisks on the bottom, but Godot is a great option for people that want to get into game making. But yeah, so we could potentially, but it usually revolves around marketing, communications, that kind of thing.
Pretty cool.
Okay, well, how about, we've talked about FreeHive, where it came from, how you started, and this was all, because of this gorgeous video that you made. How about we show the video, and then we could kind of talk about, get into the depths of tools and maybe see some of that process.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, so I have a lovely YouTube video lined up, and I'll start at the beginning. I hope you all can
If there's
hear
no
this.
music, then I'll just sing to it.
Pretty cool.
Did the audio come through?
I heard
For
it.
me.
Oh, great. Yeah, me too.
I've heard that song so many times. I don't know if I'm just hearing it. It's like phantom music.
I was wondering how you would sing it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, man, that video is like gorgeous. Really, really something. Yeah, cool. I'm glad to see that the audio came through for the audience as well. Yeah, wow. Just, do you want to? You have a little, share set up to kind of show some of your process. And if I've seen some questions about what tools do you use? I think that's the question everybody's waiting for. So
let me, I'll kind of speed through, and in terms of time, when do you want to kind of slow down for a Q&A generally?
I mean, if you want to take like 10 minutes doing this.
I just want to make sure I don't just scream at me, because as soon as I pull this up, when I was getting everything ready, I did not solve the problem about LibreOffice's presentation thing pulling up and covering all my screens. So I won't see any comments while I'm going through this. I apologize.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah.
We're here to ask the questions. We'll stop you if there's something that we need to call out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so, all right, let's give this a shot.
What I really enjoyed in the process, I was involved in some of the meetings leading up to this, but like the intermediate videos that you had sent us with the wireframes, and it kind of allowed you to get a feeling of how things are. And it's not like you have to get the whole thing ready and then show it to the client, but the whole wireframing process I thought was really impressive.
Yeah, and I'd love to get into that a little bit. And what I'll show here real quick, I'll skim through it because this isn't really the thrust of it, but it will introduce some how different free software applications kind of work together to accomplish different kind of tasks that we do. Then I'll crack open the creative files and show you kind of how this would normally work. So we're actually we changed out the logo, so pardon the old logo and all this. So somebody asked kind of what tools we use on a regular basis. And this is outside of, obviously, Linux or some variation of Linux. These are kind of the applications that we would use on top of that. Now, I have worked with people that still use Windows, and that is a great thing with most open source free software, is that it's cross-platform. Sometimes it's not as good from one to the other, but if somebody's stuck in Windows because for some particular reason, they can still use free software. You don't have to make the complete leap. So Audacity, Blender, Audacity is just a simple recorder. Blender is a 3D animation application, but it does more. I frankly do most video editing in Blender. We don't do a lot of video editing. It's mostly editing together animation clips. But I found over time that Blender is really my go-to for almost anything related to video. There is Kdenlive on here, which can do video and has some great tools. It's a more traditional workflow. Inkscape, which is kind of vector drawing. Darktable is a image processor. GIMP is kind of a complete. You can draw. You can. I use it. We use it primarily for photo editing and that kind of work, similar to how Photoshop is used. FSpy, you'll see in here, is a tool that allows you to map a still image to a 3D, kind of pull the 3D coordinates off of a still image, which is useful for some of our work. And then Krita is a fantastic painting tool. Neutron is the word just slipped my mind. It's kind of, think of it like a Photoshop for video. It's for special effects. I'm not actually very good at Neutron, but we have used it in the past. And then Scribus, I don't know how to, it's supposed to be pronounced, is desktop publishing, which we use. So let's see. This is a 3D animation of a product package that we designed for a consumer product that I don't know if it's on the shelf at Best Buy anymore, but it's all done in free software, and no one would know the wiser. So everything, and this will kind of go into, the images where this is like a stock photo, and there you go. The product is now on there. We designed this interface in Inkscape. They had a really ugly interface, and I told them as much. I shouldn't say this out loud. Anyhow, the old one was really ugly. I'm like, this is terrible. And they're like, well, come up with something better. So mocked up at least one interface for them and did it all in Inkscape, and it ended up on the package. Then here's the rendering that you saw in the box, and then we bring it into Scribus, which is a desktop publishing application. It's a little, the learning curve's maybe a little bit steeper on Scribus than other things, but it gives you that CMYK color workflow, which is important for print. So bring it in here, do all the whiz-bangery. You can see 2 versions of the packaging, and then that animation. I'll just skip through this really quickly, but we do a lot of image compositing. So I told you about FSpy. This is kind of, you're trying to figure out, you're trying to match a 3D scene to a still photo so that you can superimpose objects into the scene. So that tool kind of helps you. We're trying to find the rectangle here and derive the dimensions. And here we have stock photo of some people with an empty box, and then some woman looking at her phone. And so we're pulling the dimensions off of or not the dimensions, but the perspective lines off the bricks. And then we're coming into Blender, and you can see here that we're kind of dropping that product into the scene. It needs to have the right perspective. We'll do some stuff with coloring. Here we're dropping the box, the product package into the box. This one was a lot more complicated because it's on a reflective surface, or a transparent reflective surface. But we're dropping that product onto the scene, and then the end result is, we produce this imagery that allows a client that doesn't have the budget to order or to pay a dozen different models to sit in a dozen different scenes doing a dozen different things. So we can kind of just take these affordable stock images and then kind of create lifestyle imagery that they can use in their websites and wherever. So, and a lot of that will happen. That's kind of that workflow. This one I'm not going to spend much time in except to kind of show this kind of fun video where this is the image that we were able to source. It's just it's a Harley Davidson supplied Unsplash image, and this client didn't have any. We had very limited product photography. It was mostly they were trying to enter the U.S. market, and all the shots were in France, and we had to try to figure a way to work around that. And so this is using, GIMP and Blender to kind of repurpose this imagery. So I don't know, it looks cool. Here you can kind of see the illusion of 3D. So
it's really amazing what you can do with just pictures and the perspectives. And this really wants to make me spend some time on the weekend to get this set up and do something like this myself.
Well, and that's a wonderful thing, right? Like it's there for you to. You don't have to be in school. You don't have to have some special deal to get the software at an affordable price. You need an internet connection, and you don't have to have any. You don't have to explain it to anybody. You don't have to. You just try it and learn it, and that's what I love about free and open source software. It's just that it's accessible to people, no matter what their life circumstance is. And I just think the world will be a better place when you give people opportunities like that. That there are people out there that are vastly better at any of the things I'm doing than I am, and I love that they will have an opportunity. Like they're not locked out because they didn't get into some college program and whatever sweetheart deal that a software vendor worked out with the school so the students could afford to use the software. Like anybody can learn it. So that's one of the things I love. I'll just show this real quick because it's in the same vein. It's just a kind of a quirky use of this combination of tools. This is a little animation that we did showing somebody doing this stuff and reliving the memories that they had somewhere with this product. But in Blender, we again, this was another project that we did with just a bunch of stock photos. We just found a bunch of photos from the same model. A little secret is one of the photos isn't actually the same model, but she looks pretty close.
Nice.
I'm just only here, folks. You getting the inside scandalous scoop. But so we GIMP this out of the image, and then we create kind of this 3D layering effect. You can see it on the left. We're kind of, and we create this kind of faux 3D effect, and then we end up with that video. And I'll skip past all this. Now this does relate a little bit to the circling back around to the Ubuntu video. Oftentimes, we'll sketch the scene in Krita, and then we'll kind of cut together a bunch of two-dimensional drawings. And I won't pull it up in this project, but you'll see here we have a bunch of layers, and we'll just kind of do a storyboard with just static images, and we'll just kind of cut through. And that's what we did in this project. We didn't actually end up doing it on the Ubuntu project. We'll talk a little bit about why, but so Krita does make its finds its way into our process a lot on these animated videos. And then let's see. Then this was the Thelio project I referenced. If anyone wants to look at it, I'll drop a link in the chat. But this was very mixed medium. We had 3D animation. We had some even WebGL game that you can play on the web and a website. It was quite a big deal. But again, here's some Krita illustrations, and then going through layers of painting, and then the characters being rigged. The two-dimensional drawings are actually in this instance were those little zigzag lines on his face and everything it's just rigging. We're actually moving the two-dimensional mesh for kind of effect, and this is Neutron, so you can see kind of how we're getting some of the lens flare, glowy things happening, and then kind of we could go and I've done presentations on just this. It's a big thing. So anyhow.
So Ryan, there was one question about the GNOME 40 release video, if you used Blender in that creation as well.
Yeah.
I assume so, but yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
So the GNOME 40 video was very similar in process to the Ubuntu video. In fact, I think we got hired to do the Ubuntu video because we had done that one. So now we did really try to like make them distinct creations. GNOME 40 really focused a lot on the interface itself, and a lot of the work went into kind of animating kind of GNOME's cool workspace interface and all that. Whereas Ubuntu, this video was really, and the vision was, I have to credit Oliver because he had a really important impact on how this came together, and I thought it was really spot on in the sense that we weren't focusing so much on like the specific improvements in the interface. We acknowledge them and we show them, but it's really in line with a story about what is Ubuntu going to do for you, like where could you use it, and how would it fit into these different potential contexts. So it was a different thing than the GNOME 40 video creatively, but yeah, it did. The workflow is very similar. So do you want me to? Do you have any other questions, or should I show a little bit into the? Yeah,
I think you've appetized us well, and we are excited to see kind of behind the scenes on the Ubuntu video. So yeah, dive right in.
Okay, so there's some things I can't show, but I'll try to show what I can show. Now, that sounds circular.
That's okay.
Maybe that's intuitive. I can only show what I can show. So one of the things that becomes important in the way I like to create this kind of video is we'll pick the music pretty early on. We'll have a kind of a target length, and in this video we were looking at between 45 seconds and like a minute 15, a minute 30 at kind of the max. And so we'll narrow down kind of the time range, and that kind of correlates for most clients. That correlates kind of with their budget. If and other creative constraints. People don't watch super long videos. So this kind of video, 45 seconds to about a minute 15, is really the sweet spot to keep people's attention for kind of a high energy video. You can only make it high energy for so long before people are just like fatigued.
Enough with the energy now.
Yeah.
That's kind of, so we'll start kind of with a target range, and then we'll start with music. And the reason I like to do music, one of the things that drives me nuts as a creative, and I get why it happens, and I'm not trying to be critical of people that do it differently, but I hate when there's an audio track and that it just kind of lives. It's just laid over top of an animation, and there's not really a relationship with the music track and the video. And I know sometimes, it's of a length that you can't really sync everything up, but even just making sure that the music closes at the same time as the video, rather than just fading to nothing. It drives me crazy. And that's maybe my like creative OCD going on. But I really like to kind of synchronize that music and make sure that there's kind of a relationship there. So in this case, we went through dozens of tracks. And people have asked, why is this video not open source? Well, one of the reasons is the music isn't. So we couldn't release it under Creative Commons license because we had to license music. And, and people say, well, why didn't you use, open, freely licensed music? And we can get into that later. But anyhow, we went through, we narrowed it down to a track that everyone liked that was kind of in our, had kind of this feeling that we wanted, and it was the right length, and everyone liked it. So that's how we start. And then what I'll do, and you can see a little bit of that here. Let me see if I can kind of expand this out a little. So you'll see these little line marks everywhere. Now there's some more here there's some that were added, but if you were to see this earlier on, there's kind of a regular pattern here. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of measuring out this song. It's all mathematical. There's an underlying rhythm, and sometimes they'll change it up, and there'll be a different bit that is a little bit different. But I'm measuring it out, and that's kind of the lattice work of the bones of the animation, and so that gives me, okay, well, this song has 3 parts, and they're about this length, and then we'll look at in parallel we're looking at kind of content. What do we want to show? And so the next part is really trying to fit conceptually what we're trying to say into kind of the structure of the music we like. Now in this case, I ended up manipulating the song a little bit. It ended up being a little bit longer because we needed a longer bit in the middle, but nobody will notice that because I'm a professional. Just kidding. No, it worked out. It worked out, but you have to kind of be careful how you splice it.
Right.
Even I forgot where I spliced it, but anyhow, so we'll kind of try to fit that script. So with that context, the early stages will look something very not exciting like this. Let me pull this up. This was a review. This wasn't. Sorry. Looking through my files. Now, this video, just to give people context, it went through 15 formal iterations. So this was, early on iteration. The music is not going to be synced to I don't know if you can hear the music actually, but so basically we have descending through clouds, loading Ubuntu logos, ? Tight crop of a laptop. This is after we've kind of discussed what we want to show, and I'm listening to the music, desktop variety montage. There's actually nothing on the screen here. You can see it's just down on the bottom, and so on, right? Upgrade your creativity, and then we're like pan across home server laptop. So it kind of really starts in a rudimentary form like that, but what we're trying to do is map out and say, okay, are we giving ourselves an opportunity to talk about everything that we outlined earlier on as far as content? And then in this case, very often that will be done in conjunction with creative sketches, and we'll just kind of sketch it out. Now, in this case, originally we had this idea that everything was going to be like, everything would be nested in this like rotating Ubuntu logo, which we ended up abandoning. I ended up abandoning it because it was just like, it wasn't really working. But for that reason, we started animating it instead with kind of block shapes in Blender. So we cheated a little bit. So early on, this was the idea that the laptop would be just kind of floating in, and stuff would be happening on the screen while it's descending, and then we'd zoom in, and it would just be in this surreal environment. And then, But there was some concern that it would look like the intro, because we had to imagine logos being in the background, that it would be like the intro to The Simpsons, where you're like descending through the clouds. So we nixed that. Again, only here, folks. You're getting all the dirty secrets. But so we're just, you can see here the framework of kind of where the video went, but it's in really rudimentary shapes. Now, we ended up keeping a lot of the rudimentary elements to the device, and I've had people criticize it and say, well, why does this device not look like this one? Or why does it, well, this looks like a such and such laptop. And really, there are two reasons. The story wasn't about any specific like hardware. It was more the idea of the hardware. So the server is just like literally a rectangle, and the laptop is literally two slabs, two stretched cubes slabs that open and close. Like, it's really rudimentary. We tried to keep it as minimal as possible, because that's not really what the center of the story was, and because Ubuntu's got partnerships with all kinds of product manufacturers, and so we didn't want to like play favorites. Even later on when we're showing the logos, we have to be really sensitive to like not making any one partner stand out more than the other, and it's just a constraint of this kind of work. So we'll end up blocking this out, and you can see here it changed. It changed. We have this scene, for example, we've got like this kind of machine learning server rack thingy. I kept joking about how loud it would be in this room if this thing was actually sitting in there. But in our fantasy world, we can pretend like server racks are quiet. But we wanted that in there. And so this scene actually changed a fair amount from what it was originally. We ended up breaking it into two kind of environments. And you can see on the screens here, it's got like data visualization. It's just placeholders for things as we're kind of working through how we're thinking about it.
Placeholder part is really interesting. Looking back at the original one you showed with like just the text and like nothing.
Yeah.
Sure, that could have been a document, but this way it's all spaced out, and it feels
well, because
like
what we're trying to do,
it feels a lot more.
We're trying to take something. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. As a client, it feels a lot more okay. This is tangible. It's something that I can actually work with, and I really enjoyed that process.
It's really tricky, and we have to kind of, if anyone's interested in kind of the business of running a creative agency, it's always kind of the trick is you want to show it in as abstract of a form as you can get away with, because it's because you need to be able to iterate fast. So that whole like clouds, we didn't want it to look like The Simpsons. That came out because that wasn't a deal breaker, because we hadn't done all the work yet. And so as an agency, you're trying to show as little detail as you can, but enough that you can get useful feedback. Because if you just kind of go from, well, here's our script, into finished video, then somebody says, well, I hate the first 30 seconds of this, then you're really you're in a bind, right? Like, these things have deadlines, and you're trying to go back. So the creative process is really just a risk mitigation process. It's really all it is. And it's risk mitigation, and it's also kind of an opportunity to get better ideas. And so you kind of come out at...
It kind of reminds me of like an outline, when you're writing a book or something, and you start with an outline, and then it's a lot easier to say, oh, well, this sketched out chapter is crap. So exactly. This is just a video outline.
Because you wouldn't want to have to rewrite half the book because you get to the end and realize it's boring.
Right.
And so we have to do kind of the same thing. And so it really starts in kind of these increments. Now, in this case, I probably put a little bit too much time in this doesn't come through because of kind of the latency, but, I was trying to think about, okay, what level of, how fast can I make this? And you'll notice this video, the text is like borderline a little too fast, but I wanted to be snappy. We wanted this to be high energy, different than anything that has ever been released. And so I was trying to explore in this process too, like how fast can I show the text? How much can I squeeze in these little sections of music? And again, you'll recall, I kind of mapped it out that we have this tempo, and then we have a kind of a point about 2/3 in where it transitions into this kind of aside. And you'll notice in the video that we kind of change the style up a little bit, and we talk about the community and some of the other things. And so, I don't know what we're looking at on time, but
yeah, I was just going to
basically-
say in about 10 minutes, we kind of need to wrap things up.
Yeah.
So, one question I have as I watch your process, which is fascinating, how many folks from FreeHive were working on this?
This video, I might have mentioned, this video was just me.
Just you, okay. Wow,
Yeah.
nice.
So originally I was going to have two of us work on it, but the way it just was working out, I did most of it. So, and yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's
been,
beautiful.
It could have been two people, and sometimes, oftentimes on projects like this, one of us will be working on the capturing the screen animations and doing that side of it while the other one's doing the 3D environments. And in some of the GNOME videos, it has two people, but in this case, I did it all.
Okay. Nobody would know that. It's fabulous.
I know. I hide it behind the name FreeHive, so nobody ever
Yeah.
knows.
I'm curious,
Behind
what
the
were some
curtain,
of some of the challenges in creating this video?
All the people I worked with were very difficult to work with. I'm just kidding. No, actually, the biggest challenge on this one was just, I think, well, it was a pretty rapid pace, and just kind of keeping up with getting everything, seeing the progress that we needed to. This wasn't just a feel-good video that could be released anytime. It had to be done in advance of the release of 2204.1. So that was really kind of what we were chasing. I'm not just trying to flatter anyone. This was otherwise not a particularly challenging project in the way that other projects can be. There were no weird surprises halfway through. We tried really hard to make sure that everyone was kind of on the same page. And again, this is kind of creative agency talk, but one of the real big risks that you're facing as an agency working on this is when there are stakeholders that aren't bought in until later on. So we go through all these steps to kind of make sure that we're kind of all on the same page as we move forward. And then with some clients, you'll find out halfway through that boss man that, hasn't seen the video yet looks at it and goes, "What are you working on?" And then suddenly everything explodes. There was none of that here. It was really, it went really smoothly. So
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Can we see like another kind of iteration?
Yeah, let me pull that up. Let's pull up somewhere in the middle-ish here. Okay, so roughly speaking, we have kind of this, you saw the blocking in. So the blocks are still there. The screens are not done, but you'll see that we're starting to work on lighting. Now, you'll notice this scene from the actual video. It's pretty plain that we don't have a lot of this set really built out, but conceptually, we've got kind of figured out what we're doing. We've got the little Raspberry Pi thing on the side, and we've even figured out the animation on that, that was the hardest thing on the project. The little detail no one will notice. How do we map a spinning Ubuntu logo on? Yeah.
It's always the small things that take the most time.
It's the small
right?
things, but yeah, so you can see kind of how the pieces are here. We're starting to fill out more of it. And then the next step, because we don't want just the, let's see if this iteration has, okay, yeah. Oh, wait, hold on. Where are you? Okay, so the next step, we've put some cool community stickers on the laptop. This is actually there are actually 4 steps between what I just showed you in this one, but we'll pretend this was the next step. So now we've got we're putting we're synchronizing the screen shots to the music, and you'll see that we've actually dropped in some environment stuff to kind of build out the scene so it's clear this is like a home lab kind of creator space, and and this is your office. And we kind of ran with this idea, that everything's kind of it's a little surreal, like the desks don't have any legs. So I'm like, well, if the desks don't have legs, let's make the plants don't have supporting structure, right? Like, I don't know if anyone noticed that, but we kind of ran with kind of the surreal look.
Nice.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I blew everyone's mind. I had to get a watercolor in here. It's in there for like 2 frames or just a handful of frames because it's a workspace. You got to have a watercolor.
Right. Right.
So anyhow, that's kind of, and then this looks a lot like the final video. The next 4. There were 4 iterations after this, which were mostly fixing little problems. We discover things in our screen recordings that little blips, and I won't show you what they are because I'm embarrassed. Little blips, and so and I'll show this real quick. This is what it looks like in Blender. So let's do this. So really, I like when I'm animating this kind of thing, I like to kind of keep it simple. Because if you do a lot of crazy stuff, things inevitably get more complex as you move along. So what's happening here, and you can kind of see it in motion, there's the camera, but just moving kind of left to right. And so we're moving between these different scenes, and the camera is just kind of, maybe this will be more evident if I'm showing this. So I don't know if this comes through, but
Oh yeah, that's cool.
so you can see kind of this camera. These are really just primitive environments that have, fake walls and lights. So the reason I like to keep the environment simple and think of some kind of, very often we'll just move left or right, but some kind of model for navigating across these scenes is I don't really like cutting. I like a one-shot kind of animation where everything's kind of in the same scene. And it also simplifies things. But when you start getting into the process, I'll just show this. I don't know if this will come through real well. But once you see all the different animated objects, and this is representing kind of the different motion of everything, it gets really, really complicated. So you want to start as simple as you can because just the camera motions and and this isn't even taking into account the screen animations, but it can get really busy. So
Man,
anyhow,
that is so cool. I think a lot of us don't have experience with Blender, and seeing this level of detail and the amount of effort that went into it, after seeing the gorgeous, finished product is kind of mind blowing. Yeah.
it looks. It probably looks more complicated than it is if you're looking at like, well, what are all these lines for? But it looks cool. It's not. I don't want to like scare people away from it because I think the thing with Blender, once you can figure out some of the navigation nuances of just basic things, you can do. It is really accessible. I think it doesn't have to be this complex the first time you try something.
Right.
And really, all I'm layering, and I'm not like I said, I studied architecture. I'm not like an animation pro. Just I figure this out, and if I can figure it out, then I think almost anybody can figure it out. So but yeah, there are a lot of pieces that go into something like this, and if I'm doing my job right, it just looks easy. Like when it's done, it's just fluid, and nobody thinks about this stuff, and nobody realizes that this these columns were just little things, and it's all primitives, but it comes together. So I'll stop talking
Yeah.
about it and I let you ask questions or let people ask
Yeah.
questions.
Well, I was curious. You've probably inspired some folks here to try and try some things out. Would
I
would
hope so.
you? Where would you point folks to go get started? Is there maybe a Blender tutorial that you found particularly
There
useful?
are a
Or...
lot of good Blender tutorials. I think Blender is probably one of the most difficult. Like, if you just want to find a fun, accessible, free software application, start with Inkscape, or Krita or GIMP. They're going to be, in my opinion, the easiest just to pick up and start doing something. But if the 3D stuff interests you, there are a lot of Blender's just fantastic. It's just, I love it. I just love it, and it really was kind of the gateway for me. But I didn't get into the story, but it was the first free software application that we incorporated in our workflow, and you can work it in and still use Adobe stuff if you have to. But online, there's some great tutorials. Everyone does the donut tutorial, and Andrew Price does a good job with the donut tutorial. He'll work you through all the different steps of creating a donut, and eventually you'll kind of learn. Like I said, Blender, you just have to learn where things are and how to manipulate things, because that's not intuitive. And once you learn that, there's a lot more to learn, but you can get started, and it'll just be fun and move along. It's a fun tool.
Yeah, I think the same is true for GIMP. Like, it's so much. There's so much you can do. It's just not intuitive where to find those things.
Yeah, and Blender actually, they have some, and I don't know how much of it's free and how much behind a paywall, but they do have a formal, I think they call it Blender Cloud. They do have formal classes on how to use Blender. So if you're really serious about it, I mean, I'll use those. With Blender, you'll want to probably go through one small tutorial series to get started, and then you can experiment after that.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Looking at all the tools you use, if there was like one or two tools where you would say, oh, it would be great if the open source community could focus their effort here so we could improve them, which would those be?
Here's maybe this is my non-answer to your question. I see those complaints a lot. Like, I wish this application, this feature, this one. Maybe this is because I'm an old man now. I remember Photoshop when it didn't have half of the things people complain about GIMP not having, and honestly, I used Photoshop. Like I said, I told the story. I was using it in high school. It was like Photoshop 2. Like, it was really early on, and I never really did anything fundamentally different from when I started on Photoshop and years later. And so this is what I tend to tell people is, no, GIMP isn't going to do everything Photoshop does. And oftentimes the commercial tools won't do everything the free software tool do. But there's almost always a way to come up with the end result. So I would just say, for me, I don't really spend a lot of time worrying about what feature this application should or shouldn't have. I mean, Inkscape, I work with a lot, and I know the developers there. And they've made some good progress towards some features that have improved my life a lot. But I've been using only free software for 4 years. Well, I think almost 5 years now. And it never matters to the clients. Like, they get a great video or they get a great product package, and they never think, well, how did you do this? Because GIMP doesn't have non-destructive filters, you know what I mean? Like, it never comes up. So I kind of, this is my non-answer. I kind of don't worry about that.
Yeah.
It's a tool. Use the tool. the way it's meant to use. All of these applications come from a different background. They have different processes for doing things. Just kind of learn how the tool wants to work, learn how to use it that way. But what I'd say beyond that is embrace the potential of these different relationships between applications. Like I probably wouldn't be doing nearly as much 3D work if I didn't have such ready access to a fantastic professional grade 3D rendering application, right? And I wasn't doing 3D animation 15 years ago when I started on this because I didn't have that tool. So, now I do all kinds of weird things where I'm bringing in two-dimensional stuff into Blender. So I'm using all of these different tools in the way they're supposed to be used. So Scribus finds its way in when we're doing print. It's really about embracing the potential of the applications and less worrying about whether, feature A or feature B is better or worse or missing. That's how I kind of look at it.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ryan, and showing us the really cool behind the scenes for all the work that you do, and the focus to the Ubuntu video that we all quite enjoyed. I saw Ken say earlier he has it on loop running in his office, which is pretty funny. But yeah, thanks a bunch. And then everybody, thank you for watching. We really appreciate your viewership, and the next Indaba will be September 23rd, and it will be on the new Core 22 and Snapcraft 7 combo. So join us for that, for all of your, questions about snaps and the build tool that we use. So I look forward to seeing you.
Can I squeeze one comment in?
Of course.
Because I already have. If you're a developer out there, thank you. If you're working on any part of the Linux Ubuntu stack, thank you. I know you're working on some part of some big machine, but none of this would be possible if there weren't people out there who are passionate about making this happen. And so I just want to from my heart just say thank you for what you're doing. You've created an opportunity for me, and hopefully a lot of people like me. So sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure that
no, thanks. That's a really, really good point. And thank you for the beautiful content that you generate for the open source community and for not open source. Like you said, it doesn't matter to random company as long as they get a good looking product, and I think that's great because then you can also spread the word of open source as well. Mm-hmm. So thanks a lot. And thanks for joining us, Ryan and Philip, and everybody viewing. We'll see you next time, September 23rd. All right.
Thank you as well.
Bye.